I went to the hospital for the birth of my granddaughter. The joy of meeting her contrasted with the anguish of knowing my daughter, her mother, was fighting for her life in the ICU. Amid that whirlwind of emotions, my son-in-law approached. The coldness in his voice was frightening when he said, "I don't care about you. Just get lost and take that baby." He was referring to my newborn granddaughter. At that moment, my pain turned to fury. Without saying a word, I left the hospital and took back the car keys I had lent him for work. The next day, the consequences of his actions came knocking at his door. My name is Arthur, and at 68, while I thought I'd seen it all, life had taught me how to build, to raise empires from scratch, brick by brick, with my own sweat and toil. My hands, calloused and strong, were proof of an existence dedicated to hard work and honor. I never bent to a challenge, never backed down from a fight. But that day, as the sterile smell of disinfectant and the echo of my footsteps mingled in the polished hospital corridor, I felt the crushing weight of helplessness. The cold light of the fluorescent lamps revealed a scene I never imagined I'd have to face. My only daughter, Clara, lay in an ICU bed, pale and weak, her body exhausted after a high-risk delivery that had left her on the edge. And just a few feet away, in an acrylic incubator, a tiny being, my newborn granddaughter, fought for her life with a silent courage that broke my heart, my strength, my control, my decades of wisdom. None of it meant a thing in here. It was as if the world I had so carefully constructed had crumbled, revealing the fragility of everything I considered unshakable. The real blow, however, didn't come from the constant beeping of the monitors or the distant murmur of doctors. It came from the empty gaze of my son-in-law, Richard. He was leaning against the opposite wall, his face illuminated by his phone screen, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding. There was no anxiety in his eyes, not a shadow of concern for the woman he swore to love or the daughter who had just been born. Just a contained irritation, a coldness that froze the air around me and made my stomach turn. Before I could even form the question about Clara's condition, he spoke first, his words as sharp as knives. "I don't care about any of you," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion, a tone that made me wonder if I'd ever really known him. "Just get out of my sight and take that baby with you." The hallway seemed to spin. Those words weren't just dismissive, they were an erasure. He didn't see Clara, his wife, the mother of his child. He didn't see a tiny miracle fighting for her life. He saw an obstacle, an unwanted expense, a burden he was unwilling to carry. The pain that had consumed me gave way to a silent fury, cold and calculating. In that instant, something inside me broke, but it also reformed with relentless determination. Richard had forgotten who I was. He'd forgotten that the very ground he stood on, the roof over his head, and even the steering wheel he gripped to make a living, all had my name on it. He'd forgotten that I was Arthur, the man who builds, but also the man who tears down anything that dares to threaten his own. Anger gave me a focus that sorrow hadn't allowed. That night, as my daughter and granddaughter, fragile and vulnerable, fought for their lives, I swore that no one would ever hurt them again. The custom van he flaunted, the vehicle I had gifted him so he could provide for Clara, was his pride and joy, his primary work tool. But it was a gift, and like any gift, it could be revoked. That man had crossed a line, and the consequences would be severe. I could feel the weight of my power returning, not for my benefit, but to protect my family. The next day, my response wouldn't come in empty words or pleas. It would come in concrete action, a stark reminder of whom he had chosen to despise. The battle was just beginning, and I was ready to fight with every fiber of my being. The tow truck would arrive early, and with it, the end of an era for Richard, and the beginning of a new, uncertain journey for me and the women in my life. I just had no idea how dirty and cruel this battle would become. The next morning brought a deceptive calm, an almost silent truce after the emotional storm at the hospital. As the sun rose, painting the horizon in shades of orange, the shrill sound of a tow truck shattered the quiet of Richard's street. I wasn't there to see it, but the image of the van being hauled away, stripping him of the foundation of his supposed livelihood, was a small but significant dose of justice amidst my pain. My son-in-law didn't show up at the hospital that day or in the days that followed. His calls to Clara became more insistent, filled with a victimhood narrative that she, weakened and medicated, could barely discern. He didn't ask about his wife's or daughter's health. He demanded the van back, complaining about my interference. As soon as Clara and my granddaughter, whom we lovingly named Sophia, were stable enough to be moved, I arranged for their transfer to a top-tier, specialized care facility, away from the hostile environment of the county hospital, and more importantly, away from Richard's prying eyes and toxic influence. The facility, a haven of peace and privacy, offered not only the best medical care, but also a serene environment for Clara to recover and for Sophia to gain strength. I wanted them to have the best, a place where they could heal without the shadow of that man hanging over their heads. The first week at the new facility was a breath of fresh air. Clara began to show signs of recovery, and Sophia, with her surprising resilience, was gaining weight every day. But the calm was brief. Richard, without his precious van, couldn't work. Instead of finding a solution to his situation, he chose revenge. He started spreading a narrative to our friends and close family that I was a controlling old man, a tyrant holding my daughter and granddaughter captive, poisoning her against her loving husband and devoted father. His words, like poisonous seeds, were planted, and it wasn't long before I felt the first glances of suspicion. A call from an old family friend who once greeted me with warmth now carried a questioning tone. "Arthur, is it true you're not letting Clara see Richard?" she asked, her voice laced with a caution that had never existed between us. "He sounds so distraught." My daughter, still recovering physically and emotionally, and being bombarded by Richard's manipulative messages, began to waver. One afternoon, as I was reading a book to Sophia in her incubator, Clara, her voice weak and her eyes welling up, asked me to give him the van back. "Dad, please, don't make things worse," she pleaded, and my heart sank. Those words hit me hard. Seeing the doubt in her eyes, the confusion he was planting, was more painful than any suspicious glance from an outsider. I was trying to protect her, but he was succeeding in turning us against each other, subtly, from the inside out. I knew I had to act, but how could I prove the truth to someone being manipulated by the person they loved? How could I protect her from him without making her feel even more confused or betrayed by me? The seed of doubt had been planted, and I could feel the fertile ground in which it was growing. I needed more than my word. I needed irrefutable proof. But the question was, where would I find it, and how much time did I have before Richard turned Clara completely against me? Desperation began to creep in, mixed with my rage. It was a race against time, and I felt like I was losing valuable ground with each passing day. The sense of urgency became a constant weight on my chest. The suspicious looks from friends and family were bothersome, but the growing distance and confusion in Clara's eyes were torture. I could see the internal battle she was fighting, love for her husband versus loyalty to the father who had always protected her. Richard was playing a dangerous game, and he was using my daughter's emotions as his pawns. I needed something concrete, something that could unmask his charade and somehow bring Clara back to the reality I saw so clearly. The situation escalated in an unexpected and brutal way. On a rainy afternoon, while I was at the clinic, 2 uniformed police officers showed up at my front door. My housekeeper, a discreet and trustworthy woman, called me, her voice trembling, almost in shock. "Mr. Arthur, there are 2 police officers here," she said, barely able to contain her nervousness. They want to talk to you about a kidnapping. The word echoed in my mind like a gunshot. Kidnapping. Richard had filed a formal complaint. He claimed I was holding my daughter and granddaughter captive, preventing his access to them. The humiliation of having to explain myself to the authorities, of being treated like a criminal for protecting my own family, was immense. I, a man of impeccable reputation who had built my life on honesty, was now seen as a potential kidnapper. I went to the police precinct the next day, accompanied by my attorney, a serious and competent man I had hired in a hurry. The interrogation was exhaustive, each word weighed with the intent to discredit me. I had to recount the events at the hospital, Richard's behavior, the decision to move Clara and Sophia to the private facility. I explained that they were there for recovery and safety, with doctors and nurses attesting to their care. With every question, I felt the sting of injustice. It was painful to have to justify my actions, to have to prove my innocence when everything I did was motivated by love and concern. It was in that moment, as I saw the doubt lingering in the detective's eyes, that I realized the gravity of my situation. I needed more than the truth. I needed irrefutable proof. My word, that of a concerned father, was not enough against Richard's cunning. Something about his desperation to get the van back, something about his apparent lack of means to move forward, bothered me. If he was such a successful entrepreneur, as he always claimed, why did the loss of a single van leave him so desperate that he would invent such an absurd story? The first line of inquiry came to mind: Richard's business. He was always very vague about it. He spoke of special deliveries, of exclusive clients, but never went into detail. I decided it was time to investigate this facade. I hired a private investigator, a discreet and efficient retired police officer named Carl. I needed to understand why the loss of that van was so devastating for him. What was he really doing with that vehicle? My gut told me there was something very wrong behind his business story, and that the truth, if discovered, could be the key to unmasking him. I had to go beyond the surface, dig deep to find what he was hiding, and I knew that if he was willing to go as far as a kidnapping accusation, what he was hiding had to be something very serious. From that moment on, the battle would be fought on different fronts, and I was determined to win it. Waiting for news from Carl, the private investigator, was agonizing. Every phone ring made me jump. Every shadow at the door brought a mix of hope and fear. I felt like a ship adrift in a stormy sea, with no compass, only the conviction that I needed to find solid ground for Clara and Sophia. My days were filled with visits to the clinic, where their presence gave me the strength to carry on. Sophia, a miracle of smallness and strength, was beginning to interact with the world, her curious little eyes following my every move. Clara, however, still seemed like a wounded bird, trapped between loyalty and confusion. "Dad, the police came to the house again," she told me one day, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes swollen from crying. "They said you're stopping me from seeing Richard, that I'm a victim." My heart broke seeing her like that, so fragile and vulnerable to his manipulation. I tried to explain the truth once more, but the seeds of doubt Richard had planted were growing, choking out logic. "He sends me messages, Dad," she continued, "saying he loves me, that he misses our family. He says you're tearing us apart." She bit her lip, her eyes fixed on a distant point. Am I being unfair to him? The despair of seeing her question my intentions, of seeing the hesitation in her gaze, was a heavy burden. I knew I had to speed things up before her faith in me disintegrated completely. Finally, Carl called. His voice, usually laid back, had a serious tone that immediately put me on alert. "Arthur, I've got some preliminary info on your son-in-law's business," he began. "And it's not good." We arranged a discreet meeting at a remote cafe where our conversation wouldn't be overheard. As he flipped through a small notepad, my anxiety mounted. His company, Richard's express deliveries is little more than a shell, he explained. Virtually no legitimate financial activity. The filings with the State Business Registry are superficial, and there's no indication of regular clients or major contracts. He handed me a copy of a bank statement with a few small, irregular transactions that looked more like cash withdrawals than service payments. The only transactions I've seen with any frequency are small transfers to accounts I can't easily trace, and ATM withdrawals at odd hours. The news confirmed my worst instincts. Richard's business was a sham, a front for something darker. But what? The lack of legitimate activity only deepened the mystery and the gravity of the situation. Carl continued, his serious gaze fixed on mine. I also found he has a history of small, unpaid debts, some even with known loan sharks in certain parts of the city. Nothing that's gone to court yet, but it's a troubling pattern. It seems the van wasn't just a work tool, but some kind of lifeline for him. That information was a shock, but also a crucial piece of the puzzle. Loan sharks, debts. It explained his desperation to get the van back and his fury at me. He wasn't losing a legitimate business. He was losing his way of operating, of perhaps paying off his debts, or worse, feeding some kind of addiction. As I processed the information, my phone vibrated. It was a message from my lawyer, asking me to call him urgently. There was a gravity in his text that sent a chill down my spine. I barely had time to say goodbye to Carl, a knot forming in my stomach. That deceptive calm had vanished completely. The gears of Richard's revenge were turning, and I felt the next blow would come from an even more dangerous direction. When I called my lawyer, the news was a punch to my already aching gut. "Arthur, I just received a court summons," he said, his voice grim. Richard isn't just asking for a divorce. He's filed a lawsuit seeking sole custody of Sophia and exorbitant alimony and child support, claiming Clara is emotionally unstable and under your malignant influence." The attack was no longer just about the van. It was about my daughter and my granddaughter and the very fabric of my family. My lawyer's call left me stunned. Richard's petition wasn't just an act of desperation. It was an unprecedented declaration of war. Sole custody of Sophia, exorbitant alimony, the claim that Clara was emotionally unstable and under my malignant influence was a direct assault on her sanity and my reputation. The silent fury that had been consuming me turned into a raging fire. He didn't just want to destroy us. He wanted to rip Sophia from our lives, to steal the one thing that gave us hope. The thought that he, a man with no scruples, could have any right to my granddaughter filled me with a cold hatred. I knew I had to fight back, and fast. The legal battle would be expensive and draining, but I was prepared to use every resource I had. I had barely hung up with my lawyer, trying to process the magnitude of the challenge ahead, when my phone vibrated again. It was Elias, my longtime accountant, a man I had trusted implicitly for over 30 years. Elias was more than an accountant. He was a friend, someone who knew the financial secrets of my life and my family like no one else. His voice, however, was strange, laced with a nervousness I had never heard before. "Arthur, I'm so sorry," he began, his voice cracking. "I can no longer help you with this process. There's a conflict of interest. I can't explain." The phrase hit me like a lightning bolt. A conflict of interest? With Elias? The man who had managed my finances since my company was just a small dream. The loyalty I had placed in him, the decades of mutual trust, all seemed to evaporate in an instant. I tasted the bitter sting of betrayal. Someone from within my circle, someone I trusted completely, was leaking information to Richard. The blow was even more painful because it came from where I least expected it. This wasn't just an external enemy. There was a traitor in my ranks. My mind raced, trying to identify the weak link, the piece that Richard had corrupted. Who else knew so much about my finances, about my assets, about the structure of my wealth? Only Elias had that complete picture. The information was crucial. That call, more than any of Richard's accusations, revealed the depth of his strategy. He was using my own resources, my own information, against me. It was a dirty game, and he was playing for keeps. I returned to the clinic to see Clara and Sophia, but my mind was elsewhere. I watched them, so fragile and defenseless, and the determination in my heart solidified. I would not let Richard hurt them, no matter the cost. Elias's betrayal, though painful, ignited a new spark of fury and focus. I wasn't just fighting Richard, I was fighting the shadow he had cast in my own backyard. I needed to find the traitor, unmask him, and then use every piece of information he had leaked to my advantage. I remembered the impounded van. It was still in my possession, awaiting legal proceedings. Richard wanted it back with such a vengeance, and Carl's information about his shell business and his debts to loan sharks indicated that the vehicle was much more than a simple work tool. It was the key, I felt. The key to unraveling the truth behind Richard's facade, and perhaps the key to exposing the traitor. I decided that the next day I would search every inch of that van. I would do it alone, without involving anyone else, because trust had become a luxury I could no longer afford. I needed something that would leave no doubt, something that would silence Richard and restore Clara's faith in me. The search would be meticulous, exhaustive, but I would do whatever it took. The hope of finding irrefutable proof gave me a new lease on life, a new purpose amidst the chaos. I was about to dive into Richard's dark world, and I had no idea what I would find. Elias's betrayal ate at my soul, but the need to protect Clara and Sophia trumped any personal hurt. With the court summons in hand, and the certainty that Richard was acting with a calculated strategy, the urgency to find evidence became an obsession. That second phone, the cheap, disposable device Carl had mentioned, was my only hope. I had to search the van, find that device, and uncover what Richard was hiding. That same night, instead of heading to the clinic, I went straight to the storage facility where the van was being kept. The place was cold and silent, only the echo of my own footsteps breaking the stillness. The vehicle, once a symbol of prosperity and a generous gift, now looked like a sleeping monster, guarding dark secrets. Rust was beginning to stain parts of the chassis, and dust covered the once gleaming paint that Richard had so proudly flaunted. I felt a mixture of revulsion and determination as I opened the doors. The dim lighting of the facility barely illuminated the van's interior. I began the search methodically, checking every corner, every crevice, every compartment. I wanted to be as discreet as possible, so I refused any help. My fingers, once skilled at designing structures and closing major deals, now fumbled along the seats, the glove compartment, under the floor mats. Frustration grew with every minute that nothing of relevance turned up. I found some old papers, gas receipts, empty food wrappers, but nothing that resembled a second phone, let alone anything that could incriminate Richard. The smell of dust and old upholstery filled the air. The silence was broken only by the occasional creak of metal as I forced open a panel or by my own heavy breathing. I thought about giving up, about calling Carl again, but the image of Clara with tears in her eyes, questioning my truth, pushed me forward. I couldn't fail. I wouldn't fail. I decided to inspect the less obvious areas, those a casual glance would miss. I dismantled a part of the passenger door's side panel where there was a small compartment that seemed to have been improvised. And it was there, between the wires and insulation, that my fingers found something hard and small. My heart raced. Carefully, I pulled the object out. It was a phone. Yes, an old, simple device with a scratched screen and a worn plastic casing, exactly as Carl had described, a cheap burner phone. I felt a mix of relief and dread. relief at having found the first concrete piece of the puzzle, and dread at what it might contain. Accessing the device wasn't easy. The battery was almost dead, and it was locked with a passcode. I sat in the driver's seat, the dim light from my own phone's flashlight illuminating the device in my hands. I tried a few obvious dates, anniversaries, wedding dates. Nothing. With each failed attempt, the screen flashed with the message, "Incorrect password," heightening my anguish. It was as if Richard, even in his absence, was challenging me, laughing at my attempt to invade his secrets. But I wouldn't back down, not after everything he had done. I thought about Richard's habits, his obsessions. He was vain, always putting himself first. Suddenly, an idea struck. I tried his own birthday, followed by a significant year. The phone buzzed. The screen lit up, revealing a series of apps and, more importantly, dozens of messages. My eyes could hardly believe what I saw. Conversations with unknown numbers, filled with codes, threats, and demands for payment, messages from loan sharks, words about debts and favors. Richard's world, an abyss of desperation and illegality, opened up before me. My daughter and granddaughter were tied to all of this in a way I could barely imagine, and with every message I read, every threat, every term used, I felt a chill run down my spine. That van wasn't for work. It was the means he used to make deliveries and do favors to pay off his debts. My daughter and my granddaughter weren't a family to him. They were his insurance policy, his source of income to feed his addiction. But the worst was yet to come. I knew this was just the tip of the iceberg, and what I was about to discover could destroy everything. With Richard's phone in my hands, and the messages from loan sharks and threats revealing themselves with every swipe of the screen, a wave of dark satisfaction washed over me. It was as if I had finally solved the riddle, found the missing piece to prove the true face of that man. The conversations detailed not only astronomical debts, but also an intricate scheme of deliveries and favors to settle his accounts with dangerous people. He wasn't an ambitious entrepreneur. He was a gambling addict, a parasite who saw my daughter and granddaughter not as family, but as insurance policies, his last hand to stay afloat. The fury I had felt before morphed into a cold, calculating determination. I had the proof, his own words, the silent confession of his underworld. That cheap, disposable device was the key to Clara and Sophia's freedom. I left the storage facility with my heart still pounding, but now with a renewed purpose. The images of the messages, the dates, the names of the loan sharks, everything was etched into my mind. I imagined the relief Clara would feel upon seeing the truth, understanding that my insistence on protecting her wasn't tyranny, but love. I thought about how this proof would unmask him at the hearing, demolishing his accusations and restoring our peace. I called my lawyer, telling him, with a hint of excitement, about my discovery. He, an experienced professional, advised caution, but I could hear a renewed hope in his voice. The game, I thought, had finally turned in our favor. However, life sometimes likes to remind us of our own smallness, of the fragility of our plans. The feeling of victory was fleeting. The next day, as I was planning with my lawyer how to present the evidence most effectively, a new notification arrived. This time, it was an injunction issued by the court at Richard's request. My eyes could hardly believe what I was reading. He had managed to freeze a significant portion of my assets, claiming I was hiding assets that belonged to my daughter. Assets he claimed were rightfully hers after the marriage. The shock was overwhelming. How did he know? How did he manage that? The answer came like a cold whisper in my mind. Elias, the traitor, had acted, feeding him privileged information about my finances, about the structure of my wealth. Richard, with a perverse cunning, had used the leaked information to attack me where it hurt most. My resources for the legal battle. Suddenly, my funds to pay lawyers, for the investigations, for the clinic's expenses, were drastically reduced. The blow wasn't just financial, it was a new wave of humiliation and an affront to my ability to protect my family. He hadn't just stolen my money, he had tried to steal my ability to fight. The worst part, however, wasn't the financial humiliation. It was seeing the doubt reappear in Clara's eyes when she confronted me about the frozen assets. Richard, with his sly manipulation, had sent her messages implying I was withholding funds, that I was trying to hide assets from her. "Dad, what is he talking about?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion, her eyes filled with a painful confusion. "Why is my name involved in this? Are you really hiding things from me?" Those words were a blow to my chest, more painful than any financial loss. He was succeeding in turning us against each other, subtly, from the inside out. I had the phone, the proof of his rotten core, but he had hit me where it mattered most, in my own daughter's trust. I felt trapped, my hands tied, and with every passing minute, the distance between Clara and me seemed to grow, fueled by Richard's well-orchestrated lies. The freezing of my assets was a brutal blow, but the doubt in Clara's eyes, her questioning of my intentions, was what truly broke me. Seeing my daughter, whom I loved and protected so fiercely, begin to believe Richard's lies was a heart-wrenching pain. He was winning this war, not with truth, but with subtle manipulation and the betrayal of someone I trusted. I felt like I was losing control, my hands tied as he delivered calculated and cruel blows. Each day, Clara seemed more distant, more confused, and the messages he sent her seemed to corrode the little faith she still had in me. I sat on the edge of Sophia's bed at the clinic, watching her sleep peacefully. Her tiny hand, which I held so gently, was the only thing keeping me sane in this whirlwind. Her innocence reminded me why I was fighting, why I couldn't give up. But the despair of not being able to prove the truth to Clara, of watching her pull away, was consuming me. Richard's phone, with all its incriminating evidence, seemed useless if my own daughter didn't believe me. The humiliation of having my assets frozen, of being accused of hiding wealth, all felt like a nightmare from which I couldn't wake. I called Carl, the investigator, again. I needed something more, something irrefutable that left no room for doubt. "Carl, he's managing to isolate me from my own daughter," I vented, my voice thick with frustration. "His phone isn't enough. He's hit me in my assets and in Clara's trust." Carl listened attentively, and after a moment of silence, his voice sounded thoughtful. "Arthur, remember that van you asked me to look into?" "Yes, of course," I replied, not understanding where he was going. "You told me the van was a gift from you to him, right?" he continued. "And for security reasons, you always installed GPS trackers in your company vehicles, right?" It was then that a light switched on in my mind, faint at first, but quickly becoming a bright beacon in the darkness. I had an advanced tracking system in all the vehicles of my fleet, a system that saved data to the cloud, accessible via an app. And Richard's van, yes, it was one of those vehicles. I had installed the tracker years ago as a preventive measure and had completely forgotten about it. A tiny detail, lost in my memory, but which could now be the key to unraveling the entire web of lies. I rushed to my office, turned on my computer, and accessed the tracking system. The information was all there, detailed and precise, showing every trip, every stop, every minute Richard's van had been in motion. A flood of data was revealed, and I began to filter the information, looking for patterns, looking for the truth. It didn't take long for a pattern to become alarmingly clear. Constant trips to a derelict warehouse in the Port District and to underground casinos. The dates and times matched perfectly with the messages from loan sharks I had found on the burner phone. This data was the visual proof. Richard's journey through the world of gambling and debt. As I compiled the GPS reports, my phone rang again. It was Elias. "Arthur, I need to talk to you. Urgently. In person." His voice was broken, filled with guilt and desperation. My heart raced. Was it a trap, or the confession I had been waiting for? I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I had to face him. The revelation of the tracker had given me a new confidence. But Elias's contact opened a door to a new mystery. I was about to discover the truth behind his betrayal, and something told me the story was far more complex than I had imagined. Elias's broken voice on the phone, laden with palpable guilt, lit a flame of hope in my chest, but also a thread of suspicion. After the betrayal that had hurt me so deeply, it was hard to know whom to trust. However, the urgency in his tone told me the situation was grave. We arranged to meet in a discreet location, far from any prying ears, a small cafe on a busy street where the murmur of voices offered some anonymity. When Elias arrived, I barely recognized him. His face was pale, his eyes sunken and red-rimmed, and he looked as if he had aged 10 years in a single month. The vibrant, confident man, who had been my accountant for over 3 decades, was visibly shattered. I felt a pang of pity mixed with my still simmering anger. He sat across from me, barely able to meet my gaze. "Arthur, I need to tell you the truth," he began, his voice trembling, almost a whisper. "I wasn't a traitor. I was a victim." My mind reeled. A victim? What did he mean? He told me a story that left me in shock, a tale of blackmail and threats orchestrated by Richard. My son-in-law had discovered a serious mistake Elias had made in his past, a lapse in judgment, an accounting error that, although corrected and without major consequences, could have ruined his reputation and career if it became public. Richard had used this information as a weapon, threatening to expose Elias publicly if he didn't provide information about my assets and finances. With every word from Elias, my anger toward Richard grew, but my anger toward Elias gave way to a painful understanding. He wasn't a traitor, but a frightened man, coerced into acting against his will. I could see the suffering in his eyes, the weight of the guilt he carried. He handed me a thick, trembling envelope. "Here is the proof, Arthur." Copies of bank statements, recordings of the phone calls he made to me, detailing the blackmail and his whole gambling and debt scheme. The injunction that froze my assets was no coincidence. Richard, too, by blackmailing Elias, had obtained precise information about my assets and used it to destabilize me financially, undermining my ability to defend myself legally. The man was a master manipulator, a predator who used the fear and vulnerability of others for his own selfish ends. Despite the pain and the shocking revelation, Elias's testimony was the final missing piece. The recordings of Richard Wein, his voice, his threats, were irrefutable proof of his extortion and his dark world. Combining the evidence from the burner phone, the GPS logs, and now Elias's testimony, I had a complete dossier, an arsenal of truths he could not refute. I felt a mix of relief and profound sadness. Relief for having the whole truth, for having Elias back on my side, and sadness for the cruelty of the situation. My silent fury became an unshakable force. I was no longer just fighting to protect Clara and Sophia. I was fighting to expose a man who preyed on the weakness of others, who used blackmail and manipulation for his own ends. That night, I returned to the clinic with a new resolve. Clara was still apprehensive, but when I sat beside her, holding Sophia's hand, I felt a new determination. I looked her in the eyes and said, "Clara, soon all of this will make sense. Soon you will see the truth, and that truth will set us free." She looked at me with a hint of hope. A small flame lit amidst the confusion. I knew the final hearing would be our chance. The stage where Richard's mask would finally be shattered, and I was ready to witness his downfall. The date of the final hearing loomed over us like a storm cloud, heralding the tempest to come. The days leading up to it were filled with intensive meetings with my lawyer, reviewing every detail of the dossier we had built. The evidence was overwhelming. The GPS logs from the van, detailing the suspicious trips to gambling dens and the warehouse in the Port District. The transcripts of the messages from the burner phone, filled with threats from loan sharks and references to favors and deliveries. The bank statements Elias had provided, showing irregular money transfers, and as the final blow, Elias's recorded testimony detailing Richard's blackmail and manipulation. Every piece of the puzzle fit perfectly, painting a grim picture of Richard's secret life. I spent hours at the clinic with Clara, and Sophia, my daughter, though still fragile, was beginning to show a glimmer of curiosity about what I was discovering. I refrained from giving too many details, wanting the truth to emerge at the right moment, in the most impactful way possible. I wanted her to see, for herself, the true face of the man she had chosen. I would hold Sophia's tiny hand, feeling the strength and innocence of that little being, and it gave me the courage to face what was coming. I knew the truth would be painful for Clara, but I also knew it was the only way to free her. On the day of the hearing, the air in the courtroom was thick with tension. The cold lights, the smell of paper and dust, all contributed to the heavy atmosphere. Richard was there, impeccably dressed, with an expression of false solemnity and the air of a wronged victim. He was playing the role of his life, the devastated husband and father, betrayed by a controlling father-in-law. His lawyers were ruthless, trying to discredit every word my attorney uttered, twisting my concern into obsession, my actions into tyranny. The judge, a man with a serious demeanor and a sharp gaze, listened attentively to both sides. Richard, with a choked voice and calculated tears, narrated his version of events, describing me as a man who had prevented him from seeing his wife and daughter, who had ruined him financially out of jealousy. He painted a picture of a happy home destroyed by my malignant intervention. Clara, sitting beside me, was visibly shaken, absorbing every word, and I could see the confusion in her eyes. She alternated glances between me and Richard, as if trying to decipher the truth amidst so many lies. My lawyers presented the evidence from the burner phone. Richard, visibly surprised, tried to downplay the messages, claiming they were bad jokes with friends, but the judge didn't seem convinced. The weight of those words, the threats and references to debt, were hard to ignore. However, the decisive turning point was yet to come. The judge seemed inclined to believe Richard's flawless performance, to give him the benefit of the doubt, when my lawyer stood up, holding a tablet. "Your Honor, we would like to present additional evidence that we consider crucial to this case," he declared, his voice firm and full of confidence. Richard's gaze shifted to the tablet, and a flash of panic crossed his face. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He was still in control, or so he thought. My lawyer projected the van's GPS logs onto the large screen. The room fell silent as the routes and stops were displayed, showing the patterns of constant trips to underground casinos and the derelict warehouse in the Port District. Richard's face turned pale, but he still tried to maintain his composure, whispering something to his lawyer. "And finally, Your Honor," my lawyer continued, "we would like to present the recorded testimony of Mr. Elias Gable, Mr. Arthur's former accountant, detailing the blackmail he suffered at the hands of Mr. Richard." The audio began to play, and Elias's frightened, detailed voice filled the room, narrating every threat, every demand from Richard, and revealing the entire scheme of gambling and debt. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Richard's face, once so calm and controlled, was now contorted in a mixture of fury and despair. His mask didn't just fall, it was shattered. I felt Clara's hand squeeze mine. She was looking at Richard, and in her eyes, I saw the pain of truth mix with a shocking liberation. The game had truly turned, and the end was near, but the emotional cost for all of us would be immense. The silence in the courtroom was deafening, broken only by Elias's trembling voice on the recording, exposing the web of lies and blackmail that Richard had woven. My son-in-law's mask, once so perfectly crafted, didn't just fall. It shattered before everyone's eyes. His face, once calm and controlled, now displayed a mixture of contained fury and despair. His lawyers, previously so ruthless, seemed to shrink in their chairs with no arguments to refute the avalanche of evidence piling up. My eyes were fixed on Clara. She sat beside me, her hand gripping mine with an almost painful force. Her eyes, once filled with confusion and doubt, were now wide, fixed on Richard. I could see the exact moment the raw, painful truth hit her. It wasn't just the revelation of the debts, the gambling, the blackmail of Elias. It was the realization that the man she had loved, the father of her child, was a fraud, a manipulator without scruples. The pain on her face was palpable, but suddenly I saw a spark of something else, liberation. It was as if an immense weight had been lifted from her shoulders, even if its fall left her off balance. Richard tried to speak, to stammer some excuse, but the judge, with a firm gesture, silenced him. There was no more room for his lies. The weight of the evidence, the GPS logs, the burner phone messages, the bank statements, and above all, the irrefutable and devastating recorded testimony of Elias was undeniable. The judge's demeanor, once neutral, now revealed a clear indignation. My daughter, my dear Clara, turned to me, her eyes welling with tears, but with a clarity I hadn't seen in weeks. She didn't have to say a word. Her gaze, a mixture of pain, regret, and a new understanding, was worth more than 1,000 apologies. I squeezed her hand, trying to convey all my understanding and love without the need for words. It wasn't the time for "I told you so," but for "I'm here for you." The hearing proceeded with the formalization of Richard's defeat. He not only lost the case on all counts, custody of Sophia, the exorbitant alimony, the kidnapping allegations, but he left the courtroom to face charges of fraud and extortion. Justice, in some way, had prevailed, but the victory wasn't sweet. It didn't bring the jubilation I had expected. It was bitter and costly. It cost me money. Yes, a lot of money on lawyers and investigations. It cost me peace, torn away by the stress and anxiety of each day. And most of all, it almost cost me the relationship with my daughter. However, as we left the courthouse, watching Richard being escorted away, I felt an immense relief. That man, who had caused so much suffering, would be held accountable for his actions. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but the biggest barrier, the greatest threat, had been removed. As we walked to the car, Clara's arm linked with mine. It was a simple gesture, but it meant the world to me. The connection that Richard had tried to break was being restored. Brick by brick, we arrived at the clinic in silence, a comforting quiet that replaced the earlier tension. The first thing Clara did was go to Sophia's incubator. She lifted the baby into her arms, and I saw the first genuine smile on her face in weeks. A fragile smile, yes, still tinged with the sadness of the truth, but a mother's smile, from someone who could finally see a future free from that shadow. And in that moment, holding my granddaughter, watching my daughter smile, I knew a man's true legacy isn't what he builds for himself, the companies, the wealth. It's what he's willing to tear down, to burn, to confront, to protect those he loves. The battle had been won, but the journey of healing and rebuilding was just beginning, and I would be there, every step of the way, to guide my two women. The days following the hearing were a mixture of exhausted relief and a deep sadness that settled over Clara. The freedom from Richard came with the weight of the truth, a harsh reality she was beginning to process. She didn't speak much, but her eyes, once confused, now carried a melancholy that broke my heart. I watched her patiently as she held Sophia, stroking her little head, silent tears streaming down her face. There was no anger, no fury in her gestures, just a profound pain of disillusionment. I stayed by her side, offering a shoulder to cry on, a hand to hold. I didn't try to rush her grieving process. I knew that rebuilding trust and healing wounds would take time. We talked about Sophia, about the baby's small milestones, about the future that was opening up for them. I gently reminded her of her own strength, of the resilience that bound her to me and to her daughter. "You are a strong woman, my daughter," I would tell her, "and Sophia needs you whole and happy." She would just nod, her eyes fixed on her daughter, as if trying to find in her the strength to move forward. While Clara recovered emotionally, I focused on the practical side of our new life. The divorce proceedings moved forward. Richard's lawyers, abandoning a sinking ship, did the bare minimum to try to mitigate his downfall. Elias, my accountant, was back by my side, now more loyal and dedicated than ever. He helped me reorganize my finances, undo the asset freeze, and put everything back in order. The guilt he felt drove him to work tirelessly, and I, seeing his honesty and genuine remorse, forgave him. After all, he had been a victim too, and his courage in helping me had been crucial to our victory. The specialized care facility became our refuge, a place where Clara could feel safe and Sophia received the best care. The nurses, with their warmth and professionalism, became an extension of our family. I remember one day when one of them, a woman with years of experience, saw me reading to Sophia. "Mr. Arthur," she said with a gentle smile, "you have a beautiful granddaughter and a very lucky daughter. Not every father would do what you did." Her simple but sincere comment touched my heart, reinforcing that I was on the right path. However, the calm was only on the surface. Every day, I felt that despite the legal victory, a shadow of doubt and fear still lingered over Clara. She still felt vulnerable, shaken by the revelation of Richard's true nature. I saw her hesitate to make decisions, to plan for the future, as if expecting another blow, another betrayal. The wound of disillusionment was deep, and I knew I needed something more to help her overcome it, to truly set herself free. One day, as Clara watched Sophia sleep, her eyes again welling with tears, she turned to me. "Dad," she said, her voice weak, "I don't know how I'm going to rebuild my life. I feel so naive, so foolish for having believed him." She hugged Sophia tighter, as if to protect her from all the world's pain. "I wasted so much time, Dad. I lost my dignity." That confession hit me deeply. It was the manifestation of her internal conflict, the pain of a woman who felt betrayed, not just by her husband, but by her own judgment. I knew I had to find a way to show her she hadn't lost anything. That, in fact, she had gained a new perspective, a new strength. I needed a moment, a catalyst, that would make her see herself as the strong, resilient woman she truly was. And I already knew what to do. A plan was forming in my mind, a surprise that, I hoped, would bring not only healing for Clara, but also a new purpose for our lives. The tension was in the air, and I knew the next step would be the most delicate and important of all. Clara's confession about losing her dignity and feeling naive spurred me to action. I needed to go beyond words of comfort. I needed an action that would make her feel strong, capable of rebuilding, not just for herself, but for Sophia. My mind worked tirelessly over the next few days, searching for the perfect way to show her her worth, her resilience. And then I remembered an old project, a dream Clara and I had shared long before Richard entered our lives. Years ago, Clara, fresh out of architecture school, had helped me design a community center on a piece of land I owned in an underprivileged neighborhood. It was a dream of mine, to offer a space for children, for the elderly, a place of learning and support. She had devoted herself to it with passion, creating detailed blueprints and incredible models. But life, with its twists and turns, and the arrival of Richard with his distorted priorities, had put the project on hold indefinitely. The land was still there, vacant, waiting, and now, I realized, was the perfect time to resurrect that dream. I decided we would build the community center, but not just me. It would be Clara's project, her redemption, the living proof of her capabilities. She would be the lead architect, the creative force behind that space. I contacted some of my old construction partners, longtime friends, men and women of integrity who knew my character and the history behind that project. I explained Clara's situation, the pain she was carrying, and the need for a greater purpose. They all, without hesitation, embraced the idea with enthusiasm. I prepared a simple presentation with Clara's old blueprints and new proposals I had commissioned. I called her for a meeting in my office, days after her confession. She walked in, still a bit withdrawn, with that apprehensive look that had become familiar. I sat her down in front of my desk and, in the gentlest voice I could manage, I began to speak. "Clara, you told me you felt you had lost your dignity, that you felt naive," I started. Watching her reaction, she looked down. "But I see a strong, resilient woman with an incredible talent that has been dormant. I see Sophia's mother, a mother who fought to protect her daughter and who now needs a new beginning. And I have something for you." I turned on the projector, and the old blueprints of the community center appeared on the screen. Clara's eyes widened. There was a mixture of surprise and nostalgia on her face. "Remember this, sweetie?" I asked. She nodded, a small smile appearing on her lips. "This was one of your best designs, and I want you to build it." She looked at me, incredulous. "Dad, I don't know. I'm not ready." "You are more than ready, my daughter," I said, placing my hand over hers. This project is yours. You will be the lead architect, the visionary behind it all. I will provide the resources, the contacts, the support, but the creation, the soul of this place, will come from you." I showed her the new proposals, ideas for how we could expand the original dream, add a therapeutic garden, a larger library for the children. Slowly, the flame in her eyes began to rekindle. Doubt was replaced by a spark of enthusiasm. I saw her architect's brain start to work, analyzing the drawings, imagining the possibilities. She started asking questions, proposing ideas, sketching small designs on a piece of paper I had left on the desk. The passion I thought had been extinguished was returning. That day, Clara didn't just accept the challenge, she embraced it with a determination I hadn't seen in her for a long time. That project became more than the construction of a community center. It became the construction of her own resilience. The resolution of the legal and financial conflicts was complete. Now, the focus was on emotional resolution, on healing a deep wound, and on building a future where Clara could shine again, with Sophia by her side. The community center, still a dream on paper, was already beginning to flourish in her heart. The community hub, lovingly named the Sophia Center by Clara, became the epicenter of our new life. The once dormant land came alive under my daughter's attentive and passionate supervision. I would see her on the construction sites, hard hat on and blueprints in hand, her eyes shining with the same determination I had always admired in her. She debated with engineers, coordinated teams, and her smile, once so rare, now bloomed with the same vitality as the flowers she envisioned for the center's garden. Seeing Clara reclaim her passion, her strength, her dignity, that was the true victory for me. The pain of Richard's betrayal was still there, a scar, but no longer an open wound. She had transformed it into strength, into purpose, into a legacy of hope for the community. Sophia, our little warrior, grew and flourished every day. Her first smiles, her babbles, her small discoveries were the light that guided our days. Clara, now a more confident and happy mother, devoted herself to her with an unconditional love that had been tested and strengthened by adversity. The Sophia Center wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of rebirth, a testament to the human capacity to overcome pain and build something beautiful from the ashes. The inauguration of the Sophia Center was an emotional day. The place was filled with local residents, volunteers, friends and family who came to celebrate not just a new building, but a new beginning. Clara, radiant in a simple, elegant dress, took the stage. Her voice, once hesitant, now resonated with confidence and gratitude. She spoke about the importance of community, about the strength to move forward, about the resilience she found in herself and in her daughter. At the end of her speech, she hugged me tightly, and in her embrace, I felt all the gratitude and love she didn't need to express in words. My eyes welled up, and I knew that every sacrifice, every moment of pain, had been worth it. The community center, with its classrooms, library, cafeteria, and therapeutic garden, quickly became a vital hub for the neighborhood. Children ran through the halls, seniors shared their stories in the garden, and young people found support and guidance. Clara wasn't just the architect, she was the soul of the place, a mentor, a friend, an inspiration to everyone who knew her. She organized workshops and events, and every laugh, every smile at the Sophia Center was an echo of her own recovery. As for Richard, the consequences of his actions were severe. He faced charges of fraud and extortion, and justice finally caught up with him. His story became a distant memory, a painful chapter that, in the end, made us stronger. Elias, in turn, found his redemption. He became an active volunteer at the Sophia Center, offering free financial consulting to residents and teaching financial literacy to the youth. His loyalty and dedication, now free from the shadow of fear, were a testament to his remorse and his search for a new purpose. At the end of that year, on a sunny afternoon, as Clara and I watched Sophia play in the garden of the Sophia Center, a feeling of peace and completeness washed over me. The past, with its pains and battles, was behind us. The present was a gift of gratitude, of unconditional love, of a renewed purpose. I looked at Clara, who was smiling at her daughter, and I saw the woman she had become. Strong, independent, full of compassion and love. A man's true legacy, I reflected, isn't the companies he builds, the assets he accumulates, or the control he exerts. It's the ability to protect those he loves, to rise after a fall, to inspire resilience in others. It's the love that is planted and flourishes in the hearts of those around us. And in that garden, under the warm sun, with my daughter and my granddaughter, I knew I had built the most valuable legacy of all, a family united, strong, and full of hope.